Sorry, I didn't notice the time, so I'll call the meeting to order. So this is the meeting of the Policy and Governance Committee meeting of September 7th, September already. Wow. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district, and today are located on the Tecumseh-Secwepemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership we have with Tecumseh-Secwepemc and respect the territory and the land on which we gather for this meeting today. Additions or deletions to the agenda? We will be moving 5.2 up before 5.1, so we're just going to swap those two at the request of our CFO. Anything else? If not, a motion to accept the agenda. Moved by Director Stamer, seconded by Director Middleton. All those in favor? Carried. You have draft minutes from our last meeting. And thank you. Seconded by Director Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Carried. We are moving on to reports. 5.1 Flag Protocol Policy Amendment. Welcome to our meeting. Oh, right. 5.2. Right. I just said it. I wrote it down and I told her I'd forget. Okay. 5.2 is policy amendment. Regional grants. Oh, right. This is one where Marnie wants to say something first on it. There's something that has to be addressed.
Yeah, it's just a housekeeping item under the reference section. So the Local Government Act was incorrectly referenced at that time, and prior to it going to the board for approval, we just wanted to let you know that we will be amending that to reflect section 273, which is the general prohibition against assistance to businesses.
Any questions? No? Okay, so
Thank you, Chair Bass, through to the board. So it was my first time this year bringing the regional grant applications to the board. And we kind of first seen as they were coming to you guys that it was going to be an issue because we have a small pot of money, a large number of applicants, and not really a great ranking and vetting process. The policy had some issues with it that we saw there was opportunity to clean that up. And when we bring the board the recommendations for those grants, we wanted a better way to rank the applicants. So we've kind of got it in a couple of phases where the applications come in. Ms. McMillan goes through a list of criteria to see if those applications are eligible. And we wanted to make clear in the policy all the eligibility criteria for them just to be eligible to for the grant. Then at that point, there's different criteria where we ask, does this event help promote your area or a number of different areas? It could be a regional event. So we want to put together a ranking criteria that says, okay, is it going to help 10% of the population, 50%? So if they're applicable, then we can take those projects and give them a ranking so that when we bring them to the board, you actually have an easier way to choose rather than us giving you 20 grants and there's no parameters around what can pick. Or have people applied more than 1 to 2 years in a row within a term, and just really clean that up. The other item in here is that the regional grant need program had $20,000 in it, $10,000 per intake. That's a bit of a challenge. We're getting a lot of applications, and it doesn't seem like that's quite enough money in the pot to disperse twice a year. We did listen to the board that there was a request for possibly putting more funds in there, which also in turn means that you're going to request more taxation to make up that money. But I think right now we've put forward that maybe it's $50,000 and it's $25,000 per intake. There's a lot of need and a lot of applications that come in through the community. It would make it a little bit easier for the board. We're also looking at the economic development program and the discretionary grants separate from this, where there's other opportunities for funds that would fall outside of the criteria here. So I just wanted to kind of summarize what what we were striving for. We haven't directly incorporated the ranking criteria, but the ranking criteria is based off of what's considered an eligible application and gives us a way to rank those. And there may be 4 or 5 different ranking criteria so that we can present that in a more meaningful, objective way. So we have Ms. McMillan here as well. If there are any questions that you want to address within the policy or report that's before you, it was a majority of her work pulling this together. So I want to give her the credit. As you guys know, there was capital planning and other things pulling me in different directions as well. So I appreciate that she's here, and I'll turn it back over to the board.
Thank you. Any questions? Nobody? Yeah, go ahead.
When Marnie was talking about the Local Government Act section that changed, the reference that we have in there is actually specific to the municipalities or local governments not being able to subsidize business. So it's just important to point out that when we do accept grant applications, it's from not-for-profit groups and societies.
Okay, thank you. So no questions, then we have recommendations. Yes, Director Middleton?
Have we had problems in the past with for-profit businesses applying for grants? Is that a part of what sort of, brought this forward as well, that we've got issues with grant applicants?
Thank you, Director Bass. Chair Bass, sorry. I don't believe that we have a lot of problems with business. Sometimes it gets a little bit gray, but I will defer to Ms. McMillan because she has a little bit more history with it. I think that sometimes businesses might get confused and think they can apply, and it's very clear to us that we can't provide business with that grant funding. I think there's a button on there, Scott.
Thank you for the question. No, we haven't had any applications for the regional grant and aid from businesses. Yes, in the discretionary, we have had to turn things down due to being for profit. It's just something that we do have to note because we do say in our policy that we do not provide funds to any businesses. It's all not for profit, but if anybody challenged us, we are backed up by the Local Government Act on that one. No problem.
Any other questions from anyone? Director Smith.
Sorry if I missed it in the report, but I just have a question. If applicants are if they have to provide proof of nonprofit status.
They don't have to provide it to me. That is something I'm able to check on my own. Sometimes it's not so super easy to find the group. If it isn't, then I go back to them asking them for their society number or more information. But we have an internal database through the BC government that I'm able to look up and confirm their status. And it will actually say if they're in good status or not. If they are required by law to submit an annual report. And if it's not on there, I can see that it's not on there. Before I fund any money, I would have to make sure that that is up to date. No problem.
Any other questions? Director Thorpe and then Director Morris.
Thank you. Just a quick question. So if we've got a not-for-profit and we're giving them grant funds and then they're turning around and doing something and they're charging participants to partake in whatever they're doing, how does that work? It's kind of one of those little gray things I'm still trying to figure out.
It is a gray area. I 100% agree with you, but if you're like, for example, the fall fairs charge an entry fee to make money. I don't think I do ask for financials. That is something that is mandatory with their application. So if I'm seeing that there is a huge amount of profit, I may question. One of the new application questions as well is asking why there's a surplus of funds. They need to explain that to us. I would say most of the time, if it's a fall fair event, let's just use that as an example, it's going to be a break-even point. They're not going to be really making a whole bunch of money. I know there are other groups that do apply often that do make a substantial amount of money, but I think then that's something that has to go back to the board, and you folks have to decide how you want to approach that depending on the situation. I think it's fair for somebody to charge an entry fee to cover costs, and they don't want to, yeah, that makes sense.
Director Morris, then Director Roden. Thank you. So I think both of these questions, in fact, may just be a reminder from you folks to me. One of it is the statement about criteria to rank applications and the criteria established. Is that fairly easy for a not-for-profit to find, for example, on our site, to understand what that criteria is?
The criteria is all going to be outlined in the policy. So if they meet all of the policy criteria, for example, not-for-profit, their project or event benefits more than 2 electoral areas, all of those are going to transfer over into the ranking system that will, like, they'll correspond to each other. Us providing a ranking system to you folks is probably not something we want to do, because then it kind of gives away how we rank them in a weird way. Like, it's should be an internal document, I feel.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that if they're a great group with that's, you know, in good standing, has a broad benefit to the community and the TNRD as a region, they're going to hit all those marks. Absolutely. But if they have our ranking criteria, they'd be able to maybe fudge their application.
CFO Fox.
Thank you. And I think too, when you think about a community hall putting on an event, let's say, and it's going to target 200 people in that area, as opposed to another event that might actually target 2,000 people. Not only do we have to look at what is 200 people in a community, maybe there's 2,000 people and 200 is a good number. Maybe 2,000 people out of 10,000 people is, so we have to look at the ranking criteria in a couple different ways, but I think it should be information that we can get from them that they're going to have some awareness of. It's not like we're going to put criteria in there that is going to be unreachable for them. So and as Ms. McMillan said, it just is in reference to what makes you eligible is it within your area? How many people is it going to reach? It's that type of criteria, and it's not an extensive list of 10 different things.
Thank you. So that certainly answers that. It was more a matter of the transparency of what you can say vis-a-vis the ranking. The second very quick question is around the chronic applicants, as I call them, the year-over-year group. Are there any policy changes in that you are feeling you should implement or you have implemented? And this is really just for me for information only, probably.
That is something that we did add in. So it says, and to be honest, it was in there last time, just maybe not necessarily followed. No organization will receive more than 2 regional grants from this program in a 4-year period, matching a 4-year term of office of the TNRD directors. We also did note no organization will receive grants exceeding $5,000 per annum. So if they apply in May and they apply in September, they could receive $5,000 total, not $5,000, say, each intake, and then they're done for 4 years.
Director Broden?
Thank you. Just a question about filling out the forms. In my experience, a lot of small rural community groups aren't very experienced or very good at filling out forms. And this is a fairly not difficult, but it's not a one-page tick some boxes and you're done either. I did notice with the last intake that one that stood out to me was a group in Spence's Bridge in the identify which electoral area and or member municipalities this project event or service will provide. They just ticked area I because it's in Spence's Bridge. And I'm thinking they have musicians coming from Merritt, from Kamloops, from Clinton, from 70 Mile, from Lytton, from Ashcroft and Cache Creek. So is there some way, like, I know that staff have more than enough to do, but is there some way that there's some guidance that can be provided just for groups that might be struggling with the nuance?
I do definitely follow up with them in some respects because I agree, especially knowing like that's Desert Days, for example. I did read further down in their application. They did note that they were having musicians coming from other areas. So I internally clicked the boxes. I do go back on a lot of questions asking, sometimes they don't provide all the documentation. So I think going back and forth does help. We did have 15 applications this year, so it was a bit more work than normal. And not all new to me because it wasn't something that normally I would do. That was handled by the previous CFO. So I think that moving forward, I definitely would work with the groups to make, especially if they're a new group and a new application who I don't really know what they do. I think I definitely, or the grants person would go and do that.
Director Steamer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions have already been answered, but one question I have is what total are we going to be looking at on a yearly basis? Are we going to be looking at an increase on our existing grant applications, or what are we going to be looking at? And the second question is, are we going to be just looking strictly at staff recommendations when those numbers are coming through, or do we have any way of vetting through that process?
CFO Fox?
Thank you, Chair Bass. I'm wondering, when you ask about the total that are coming through, do you mean do we anticipate there to be a lot of applicants, or we are going from $20,000 available twice a year, $10,000 twice a year? And if we go to $25,000 twice a year, it's 50,000. So we're looking at an increase in the budget requirement of about $30,000.
So for clarification, thank you, through the chair. So what you're saying is that's what our new numbers will be. That will be our next request in 2024.
If the recommendation is supported by this group, it would go to the board for a request to approve that amount. Yes.
Any other questions? Any other discussions? Director Smith?
Just in the report, there was mention of a grant review committee. Would that be a committee of, like a proposed committee of the board, or would that be a committee of staff?
So at first, we went back and forth with those two ideas. Right now, we've recommended a committee of staff of 3, just so that there is some objectivity between 3 different people with the same criteria. And we didn't involve the board at this point. Part of it from my perspective is the amount of time it would take, and then the terms of reference that need to be defined for a committee. I did choose to keep it more simple at this point. It's certainly open for debate from you guys if you want to see something different, or we can give it a try. And if you guys would like to see that change next year, we can certainly revisit it. But I did purposely just put it because it was more simple from a management perspective.
Anyone else? Okay, we have 2 recommendations in the report. Someone want to move? Moved by Director Middleton, second by Director Smith. Any discussion? All those in favor? Carried. The second motion or recommendation? Hmm? Thank you, Director Laird, seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, back to where I screwed up. Hmm? Yeah, I know. Yeah. Okay. Over to you, Corbin.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Bass, and through to the committee. The policy as amended, policy 1.4.1, flag protocol, has been updated to reflect the following two additions. One being that host First Nations flags should fly in priority at TNRD buildings. So for example, here at the Civic Building, the Te Kamloops Te Secwepemc flag would fly instead of the City of Kamloops's flag. And at library or branches, the host nation's flag would fly likely alongside the TNRD flag to show good partnership. This recommendation comes following conversations that have been had with a number of First Nation communities that are within the TNRD's boundaries, as a way to essentially permanently recognize the territory in which our buildings sit on and operate on. So that is the first amendment to the policy. The second amendment is that in the policy, it's outlined the number of occasions that the TNRD will half-mast flags. The addition there is that on September 30th, which is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, that flags at that the TNRD Civic Building will fly at half-mast from sunrise to sunset. Those are the two recommendations, amendments made to the policy. And I'd be happy to take questions or comments.
CEO Hildebrand.
Thank you. And just to add, if I could, this is a no disrespect to the city of Kamloops whatsoever. We know there's many municipalities within our regional district, and switching that flag out here at the Civic Building, we thought was just a good token of partnership with our First Nations.
Okay. Any discussion? Director Middleton?
So, excuse me, on this is the ask for to do this at all TNRD buildings within our regional district. So this would include libraries out in the region. Would we, and I guess we wouldn't even actually have the trade, does this also extend to other municipalities within our district, or is this just strictly at district buildings? And do we have any areas where we have more than one nation, shall we say, within that area? So is there a common flag to all that can be flown, or are we going to have to source out and try and get how many flags from there? Do they all, sort of have flags that can be actually flown?
Yeah, thank you, Director Middleton, through Chair Bass. So firstly, this only applies to TNRD buildings. So this is only for the Civic Building, the 4 flagpoles that we have at the front of the building, and only applies to Thompson-Nicola Regional Library branches. The one thing that I should add that's referenced in the policy amendment that I should have at the beginning is that it's only for should the host nation approve us using their flag. So in areas where there's multiple First Nations, we would want to seek approval to use all of their flags. Based on my understanding of territorial overlap, it's going to be easy for us to work with them in a number of our branches, say in Barrier or Clearwater or Blue River, or even in here in Kamloops. As we move into other areas, it will be more complicated, but it is a necessary step, I believe, in building the relationships with the First Nation partners that we have within the regional district. And additionally, it provides a good stepping stone for that relationship building as a request for their approval to build that relationship.
Through the chair, just next question then is, do we actually have enough flagpoles at our facilities? So when we speak that there's 4 here, I'm presuming we have, I should go outside and look, we have 4 flags up there now. But now if we're to add a 5th flag, do we drop a flag? Do we tier flags? What's the protocol for flying, actually physically flying the flags?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. So to answer the first part of your question, we'll be working with facilities to install exterior wall-mounted flag poles at the library branches. So that will be done there, as they do not have exterior flag poles. In reference to the flag poles here at our civic building, the request would be, and Kamloops has approved the use of their flag. So pending board approval, we would lower the city of Kamloops's flag and fly the Kamloops flag instead. Of course, you know, we could look at other options if the board does not want to move forward with that, but we would need to reference proper flag protocol.
Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So correct me if I'm wrong. In all the other libraries throughout the region, the proposal would be to fly the TNRD flag, the municipality flag, if there's a municipality flag, and then possibly a First Nations flag. That's correct? We're not going to fly a municipal flag now?
So currently, there are no flags flown at libraries. Municipal flags are not flown. So the policy reads that First Nations flags will fly should that First Nation approve the use of their flag at our buildings. And then if they do not, then a municipality's flag would fly. And that's mostly in reference to the TNRD Civic Building.
Well, I'm reading right here, excuse me, but I'm reading right here. It says there are 3 states of the following type flags to be flown by the TNRD. TNRD flag, Canadian flag, British Columbia flag, and flag of hosting municipality. Correct?
It should say or flag of host municipality.
Well, it says and. So my suggestion is that similar to what we've done in Barrier, is that we fly both the District of Barrier flag and SIM flag. So I don't see any reason why in this situation, particularly at this building, why we couldn't fly the TNRD flag, the City of Kamloops flag, and the Kamloops flag. And then do the same thing throughout the region where we have the TNRD flag, the municipality flag, and the First Nations flag. That's me. And the second part is, if we're going to have overlap, have you checked to see if there's a possibility that we can use a tribal council flag? Because there could be 3 or 4 flags. If that's not going to work, then I'm fine with that. If there's 3 or 4 First Nations that are in that area and they want to each fly their flag, they can fly their flag just like all of us at the same height, the same recognition. But I disagree with taking the Kamloops flag down and replacing it. I think there should be 3.
Go ahead.
To answer the second part of your question first, we would need to discuss that with the First Nations that it would be impacting. So like I said, in areas like the library branch within the District of Barrier, we know that that's SIMP's territory, and therefore we don't have any overlap. As we move into other areas that there might be overlap, that would need to be a conversation that we have with those First Nations, recognizing that some of them may not be members of the tribal council that is local to the area, so it might not be acceptable to use that flag. To reference your second question, if the board wishes, or if the committee wishes to make that recommendation to amend or add that addition that municipalities' flags and First Nations flags should fly, I would welcome that recommendation. However, I would say that I think anyone can recognize when they're in the city of Kamloops that it is the city of Kamloops. When they're in the District of Barrier, that they're in the District of Barrier. This move is to ensure that they also recognize the territory in which they're standing on. So again, I think the other thing that we would need to look at, if that's a recommendation to then fly 3 flags is the increased cost that would have based on additional purchasing of flagpoles and installation.
Anything else, Director Stamer? Are you
Well,
moving
other
something
than
like that?
I'll make a recommendation to that effect at this building unless somebody else doesn't want to second it or continue discussion.
CEO Hildebrand?
Thank you, Chair. Just from clarification, we have 4 flag poles out front. So if that recommendation went forward, we do need to go to 5 because I'm not sure it's appropriate to stack them or tier them as maybe it is. I don't know. We'd have to figure that out. But we have 4 poles now. So if we wanted to include the city, First Nation, TNRD, Canada flag, and BC flag, we would need 5. So just for clarification, which is not a big deal. So I just want to provide that information.
Advisor Kelly?
If it might be an additional recommendation, and depending on how the committee feels, that rather than removing the municipality's flag, that perhaps it's the TNRD flag that's removed, being that it does say TNRD Civic Building directly in front of our flagpoles, that instead that's how the policy will read.
The point was to allow the committee and then the board to make the final decision. So we were just bringing recommendations.
Okay, so we still have a motion moved, no seconder yet. Director Laird? You want to repeat your motion?
Well, I didn't realize that we had that at this building, but if we have to drop a flag, I don't see any reason why, as we mentioned, we don't have to fly. I don't think we have to fly the TNRD flag. I mean, it says TNRD right on the building, and all our libraries are the same. So if that ends up being the situation, I would much rather be able to represent our levels of government, federally, provincially, municipality, and First Nations. And if there's multiple First Nations, there's multiple flags.
Director Laird?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a problem of dropping our TNRD flag. We are in the TNRD and the same as we're in the city of Kamloops. I would much rather see another flagpole go up, and that shows that we're all equal. It's a TNRD regional district where we're at. And if we drop that, who are we? And we're saying that our flag's not important, but the First Nation flag is more important than ours because we took ours down. If we're going to add flags, I feel that it should be an extra pole put in and everybody fly at the same height. I don't think it's right that we should remove the Kamloops flag. And if we want to proceed with this, there is a problem in our area M and N. There are 6 different bands in that area. None of them talk to each other very seldomly. And how are you ever going to address 6 different flags at our TNRD library? And who's going to pay the cost of putting all that in? It doesn't, as far as I know, they don't have a nation flag in our area at all because they don't have that. And I think we have to be cautious on how we're handling this, because if you miss a flag from one of the existing bands that have been there as long as Merit's been there or longer, that's just respectful. That's the way I see it. If we're going to fly a flag, we have to recognize all of the bands and all of their flags and not say you can't be there or we have to take our flag down. So I don't think I would support the motion that we take any flags down. We need to look and have all our flags flying.
I'm going to go to CA Hildebrand, then I'm going to go to Director Roden. At some point, I will get back to you. And I'm making a list, but I'm unclear now if we actually have a motion on the floor. So let's just assume we actually don't right now. We have because I think you've changed your motion a bit.
That's fine, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. So you go ahead, CEO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Bass. To Director Laird, I just want to make sure that we clarify this. With say there's 6 First Nations, which we're well aware of, 5 or 6, depending on who would want to participate in Merit as an example. We would sit down and talk to each of them. And if 3 want to participate, 3 flags would go up. If all 6 want to participate, all 6 would go up. So it would just be, that's kind of a unique one where we would have wall flags for all the First Nations there. And I think that would be one of our only libraries that would have a bunch of flags. So that's to that extent, there's 6 First Nations in and around Merritt. So just for clarification, we would sit down and actually get approval from each of those First Nations.
Director Roden?
Thank you. First of all, am I correct in assuming that there are currently no flags at any of our TNRD libraries? At the risk of being overly simplistic, perhaps we could leave it that way and simply talk about the flags outside the TNRD Civic Building here in Kamloops. If we have no flags now, and it has not been an issue until now, and considering the cost and the confusion, the complication, and the vast potential for hurt feelings and feelings of anger one way or another, perhaps let sleeping dogs lie at the libraries, which are adequately signed that they are TNRD, and simply talk about whether we want to have 4 or 5 flags outside the TNRD Civic Building. Perhaps the flags at libraries question could be separate and discussed at another time after there's been perhaps a bit more research into it.
Advisor Kelly?
Thank you, Chair Bass, through to the committee. A number of things. First off, I think it's been established that on the exterior of the building, it does say Thompson-Nicola Regional District Civic Building. So dropping the flag is not to say that we are no longer within the TNRD or saying that that's not, the TNRD is not more important or less important. So just a point of clarification there. The second piece is that, well, yes, it might be easier for us to let sleeping dogs lie and to not fly any flags at libraries. Reconciliation is not easy. I think that this is an important step in the right direction to reconciling the relationship between this organization as a level of government with another level of government being First Nations. And so we have had discussions, for example, with SIMC in the North Thompson. We do have their approval to use their flags at our library branches within their territory. And so that's something that we would like to move forward with. But as we move into other areas, into other library branches, especially recognizing Merritt and others throughout, for instance, Area I, where there are a number of First Nations, I think this is a necessary stepping stone to building those relationships with those First Nations and ensuring that we are being respectful and acknowledging whose territory we're on. So I understand it's going to be a lot of work. It is going to take a lot of research and a lot of time as we move into those other branches and recognizing those. But it is not, I didn't bring these amendments forward because they would be easy. I brought them forward because I believe that it's a necessary step in the process to reconciliation.
Sure.
No, I absolutely understand that. I'm a huge advocate of government to government. I'm just thinking that given the sometimes frosty relationships between different First Nations, often within the same nation, my concern would be that rolling it out, say, for example, for SIMC, and not simultaneously rolling it out anywhere else would lead to hurt feelings at the First Nation level. I'm thinking in particular of one First Nation in Area I that I can see getting their nose put out of joint, for lack of a better term, if SIMC was recognized in that way before they were. So that was why I was suggesting that perhaps we start with the flagpoles outside this building. And then while that's happening, we work on something so that we can present a fait accompli for every library at the same time after having done the negotiations with the relevant First Nations in that area, so that instead of it being higgledy-piggledy, okay, one goes up in Barrier and one goes up in Cache Creek and one goes up in Merritt over a period of months, boof, here we go. Here's what's going to go at all the libraries. So that then there's no possibility of anyone feeling left out or not part of the discussion. That was what I intended. Let's start here. And then let's move on and present the whole picture at the same time for all the libraries.
Unless you think I've forgotten you all, I have the following. Director Smith is next, then Director Thorpe, then Director Stamer, then Director Laird, and at some point I'm going to chime in too.
I think that meant me. Okay. My question's actually on item 4.3, so it's not on that particular piece. We've had the experience a number of times in Logan Lake the last little while to be lowering our flag. And what we've run into is that it's often not appropriate to lower the flag from until the time of the service, because sometimes it's a big gap in many cases, months. So I was just going to suggest maybe adding something to the to that about the discretion of the chair, or an alternative time frame in terms of lowering the flag in the event of death.
And just to add to that, sometimes there aren't services. So anyhow, go ahead, Advisor Kelly.
Yeah, thank you for that point of clarification, and that is certainly something that I'll make note of in terms of adding. I know that the requirements for lowering flags to half-mast is quite hodgepodged, for a lack of a better term, within that policy. So it is certainly something that we can update and bring back to this committee.
Director Thorpe.
Oops. So first of all, I agree with Director Laird. I do not want to see the TNRD flag taken down, because I think it's disrespectful to the TNRD. The TNRD has as much right to have a flag there as any other government, whether or not this says it's a TNRD building, just my personal thought. With respect to the First Nations, that's super complicated. If we rebuild the Lytton Library, we've probably got 6 flags there. Now, assuming you can get all 6 First Nations on board and have those 6 flags, great. But if you only get 3 and you only put 3 of those flags up, then you're going to have members of the 3 that aren't there going, where's my flag? And they may not understand the politics or what went on behind the scenes. And so it's extremely complicated. I think we're almost in an all or nothing situation, that everybody's flag goes up or we don't do it, just because of the nuances of not wanting to offend anybody. It is complicated. And I come from the area that has more than half of the First Nations.
Director Steamer. Then you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, after hearing what Director Laird had to say, I totally agree that our flag should be here, and I certainly agree with Director Roden's approach, in as much as that this is the building would be the first step, and then, as she alluded to, we'd make sure that all the other ones would be taken care of, and we could do it simultaneously whenever that time would be. But again, the part of my motion was to the effect that if we're going to be putting flags up, I think it's only fair if there's a flag in Barrier, or at our TNRD library in Barrier, Clearwater, or anywhere else, we should be recognizing the municipality as well. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't do that. Again, that's what we've done in Barrier. We've got a very good working relationship with SIM. There's many things that we're working together on right now. We're going to be meeting with 3 ministers at UBCM with Chief Lampro with us. And one of them is going to be a joint housing initiative that we're doing on a piece of Crown land in the downtown area. It's brand new. It's never been tried before. And we're hopeful that it's going to go through very quickly and it's going to be successful. So I think that that's the reason why I put that motion forward, is that we should make sure that everyone gets recognized equally.
Okay, I'm going to chime in now. Before I go back to Advisor Kelly, my concern with what Director Roden is saying is, what happens if we never ever get any approval from one band? You know, And reconciliation is a two-way street. And if we go to the bands and we say we want to do this, this is part of our reconciliation. We want to work with you. I kind of, and I hope this doesn't sound wrong, but I kind of think they have an obligation to sort of think about that. And if we put this off, we may never do it. Because as you're saying, there are some bands that just don't get along with each other and would take offense. But if we're trying to work with them and they take offense, I have an issue with that. So that's my only observation here. But I want to ask what the costs might be to get that clarified before we go to Advisor Kelly. Or you're going to do that? Good. Go for it.
Yeah, so flags, to purchase flags, they're standard size and cost. I believe the flags to purchase from SIMC were around $30. So we could estimate that for each flag purchased. Additionally, we don't have a formal quote in terms of flagpole installation. I should clarify that it's not the flagpoles that we're wanting to install are not nearly as substantial as the ones outside here. So they're the typical wall mounted, fairly easy. I think the average price that I have found for them is around another $30. So per flag, we're looking at about a cost of $60 plus installation. So it's not a huge cost, but that is just something to clarify.
I have to let Director Laird, then Director Middleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I want to see a flag put up, I don't want to see it hanging on the outside of the building. I want to have it like what we have out here. It shows respect. It shows that we care and that we are willing and to spend the money and put in proper recognition of the community we're in, the TNRD flag and whatever First Nation flags are there. I don't see the point of hanging flags around a building. We all know what they look like. And there is different flags. If you don't get the right kind of flag and it flies in merit, the wind will blow it apart in probably 2 months, the way the winds blow. So I appreciate the direction on where we're trying to go, but I think we have to look at exactly what we want to do and give some direction now as to what we want to see come back to this committee for approval. The other thing, I don't see any budget attached to this recommendation. You just don't put up, say, $50 for flags. And I know that's not true. It's not an adequate cost. So I would like to see if we're going to move forward, we need a proper budget. And it has to go in, if we're going to do it, it has to be in 2024 budget year. And it's another cost that we keep adding to the taxpayers. And is it something the taxpayers really want to see? A flag stuck on the side of a building? Or do they want to see a proper flag recognizing the importance of reconciliation? This is just a Band-Aid start, but I don't feel that's a good start myself. I think it should be done properly and have a big, if we're going to do it, let's have a celebration. We put in all these like proper flags outside our buildings, and let's do it properly. The other question I have, does the TNRD have the ability to tell municipalities how they should raise and lower their flags? I think each municipality has their own bylaw, their own, however you want to call it, protocol for flags. Kamloops will lower their flag for different reasons. It doesn't mean that Logan Lake and Merritt are going to lower their flags at the same time. So it's up to the municipalities, I think, to decide when and if they need to lower the flag. I don't think the TNRD can tell them when and if they need to raise or lower flag. So that I don't think is a possibility. And I think we need a little bit more time put in and make another presentation to this group and have it done professionally. It would be nice to see all the things that I've asked for. And that's my comments.
Director Middleton.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm going to echo a lot of your sentiments as I feel that putting flags on the outside of the buildings on building mounted flagpoles. I think if we were going to be looking at doing something like that, ongoing maintenance and the actual sort of visual of what that's gonna look like is possibly going to be, look worse than better. And would we move more to something like plaques inside the library, wall-mounted plaque inside a building that might recognize all the various Indian sort of nations, bands, whatever, but the flags hanging on the front of buildings generally look worse for wear very quickly. They are not flags that are lowered or removed or half-mast on any kind of occasion. So basically, it would be a flag in lieu of a plaque to me, and I would favor more going to something like a plaque instead. And on the building here, City of Kamloops already does fly to Kamloops flag. If we had to start going to the cost of installing another flagpole and, you know, to match the ones that we have out there now would be significant. I mean, just engineering alone, you know, the costs, the infrastructure that you've got to put in to fly a flagpole could make that a significant burden. I would really like to see if there is a protocol for curing flags on flagpoles where we may be able to add flag, but not a flagpole.
Director Stamer, then Advisor Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Director Laird brings up some really good points. And I agree that we should be having flagpoles, not on the buildings. But I think that if we could figure out what we're going to do at this building, that would be important. And I believe the way the protocols work is that you can be responsible for your own building. So if we have a TNRD building, let's say in Barrier, and let's say one of the directors of the TNRD, past or present, passes away, and we believe the protocol is that we are going to lower the flag at all TNRD buildings in respect of that director. There's nothing that the municipality can do to stop you from lowering your flag. So that's something to think about, is that, you know, if we do the flags at our buildings, we have control on that portion of that. So I think it would go a long way in reconciliation as well, is that we can go over and recognize even more than what, you know, other municipalities and other entities are doing. But as for the tiering, I think we have to be super careful on that, because as soon as we start doing that, then we start changing the importance or the perception of importance to those flags. And looking at the protocols here, the Canadian flag is the one that's supposed to take precedence always. And we have to be super careful going forward on how we address some of these situations, because, you know, there was a point made about, you know, possibly one group may not want to have their flag flown. Fair enough. But we've gone through the process to make sure that they've been asked and they've decided they don't want to do that. But I think that that's a very good idea that we could, I mean, we're already getting into almost winter, so that we haven't got even a budget set up. If we were going to go ahead and do flagpoles, and how many flagpoles we'd be using, and are we going to include the BC government? Are we just going to do the TNRD and First Nations, or should we do the TNRD, First Nations, and municipalities? You know, there's a lot of moving parts in this whole thing, but maybe a good opportunity would be next year at this time, when we do celebrate Truth and Reconciliation Day, that this would be a show of good faith going forward in recognition.
Okay, I'm going to go to Advisor Kelly, then I have Director Laird and Director Roden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through to the committee. I want to clarify a few things, because I feel that we've gotten into the weeds a little bit here in terms of what the recommendation to the committee actually is. The recommendation is to amend the existing flag policy, which only applies to TNRD buildings. It does not apply to any building operated by a municipal government. So this is only our civic building here and our library branches and any other property that we might have throughout the region. So that's number one. Number two, the point of this policy or this recommendation is to amend the policy to allow us as staff to look into further how we are actually going to go about doing this. So the the request of this committee is not to, we can certainly discuss at length like we have, how we're going to fly the flags, whether we're going to install exterior wall-mounted flags, whether we're going to install actual flagpoles. That's a conversation for later, in my mind. This is simply to amend the policy to allow us to begin the work of actually looking at flying additional flags at our buildings. So it's simply a policy amendment. I am not requesting a budget at this point to fly flags. Those numbers were simply given at the request of Chair Bass for an estimated cost for some things. But this is not to request approval of the board for a budget to install flags. This is simply to amend the policy to allow us to begin the work to look into actually installing flags. So that's the second point. I do understand that there is a want from this committee to request that it's all or nothing. Again, I think that that's a conversation for a later time. I think if we can approve or you may approve the amendments to the policy now, which would allow staff to then take on recommendations for any number of things that have been discussed. And finally, just a point of clarification, the word Indian is no longer appropriate to use. It should be Indigenous or First Nations. So thank you.
Director Laird, then Director Roden, and I hope we can come up with some suggestions on what we're doing soon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do anybody understand exactly what happens when one of the elders passes away on a First Nations property? Everything stops for at least a week. They don't have meetings, they don't have anything, they just celebrate the person who has passed. So how are we going to, and a flag, are they going to be able to take their flag down and half-mast for a whole week while they celebrate the death of one of their elders? They have an entirely different look in society than we are. They might not even want flags. And how do you ever address the difference in culture? And I do feel that this should not be a policy change. I think we have to have more information before we actually put this into a policy, because we have no idea where we're going and what we're doing. And it doesn't require a policy change to come back with the information on what you want to see do and happen with flags. We can change the policy anytime, but I'm not prepared to give staff a policy for them to go and look and be part of the already First Nation flags flying in our area. We need a lot more information, because what we're doing is we're trying to change First Nations societies to adapt to ours. They didn't have flags. And I'm sorry, but I've dealt with Natives my whole life. I have a lot of knowledge about how their system works and how they look at their own societies. And now we're saying, well, we're going to be good friends and put a flag outside, recognizing that we're in your territory. They already know we're in their territory. It doesn't require a flag. I think a plaque might be a great idea. Put inside your building, recognizing it. I don't feel that flags at this time, there's not enough information to support a policy change. And I think I'm going to make a recommendation that staff go back and look at exactly what they want to do and how they want to proceed, and then bring it back to a future meeting. There's not enough information for me to make any kind of support of even a policy change right now. It's too, there's nothing even in the budget. We haven't had budget discussions. And when you're talking about what we're doing, we got to know how much it's going to cost, because we are the ones that have to go to our taxpayers and say, this is what we think is good for our communities. And there's not even any discussion around cost or anything. So I think we need a lot more information before we go forward. And I recommend that staff go back after hearing the conversation we've had here today and reevaluate and bring a different perspective back. And flags, like might not be the answer. Plaque might be an answer. And they're simple and easy to do. So I would make that recommendation.
Go ahead. Mark.
We currently have one recommendation that is on the table right now that will need to be addressed prior to making a new recommendation.
Yeah.
My motion, but can I rescind that motion or do we have to vote on it?
Absolutely, you can rescind it.
I'll
No,
rescind it.
I took it that you had withdrawn it.
I'll withdraw it now if I have.
Right, thank you. Okay, so we have a motion from Director Laird. Anybody want a second? Director Thorpe, any more discussion? Director Smith?
I just truly am actually ignorant on the topic of what's appropriate in terms of First Nation flags. But it occurs to me that the Every Child Matters flag sort of covers Indigenous people sort of as a whole. And I don't know if it's disrespectful to fly that one until such time as they notify us that they would prefer something different, but it's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Director Stamer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, listening to, everyone's comments at this committee level, I think we all appreciate the sensitivity of the matter that we're speaking about. And I agree with Director Laird. I don't have enough information going forward on what we should and shouldn't do. My point at the beginning was that I don't think we should be taking, flags down and putting other flags up. I didn't think that that was fair. Whether it was to the municipality or the provincial government or whatever we're talking about. So I agree with Director Laird that I think we should be bringing this back again with further discussion and at the same time, possibly get more information from our First Nation neighbors to be able to ask them what they would like to see. Because again, I know Corbin's our liaison with that, but at the same time, I would certainly want to be very careful on how we go forward with this.
Any other discussion? CAO Hildebrand, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bass, and to Director Stamer. Thank you for the comments. And I'm listening to this all very carefully, but an example would be Sim First Nation and T-Test are the first thing T-Test asked when they walked in this building for a meeting is, where's our flag? SIMF has already said, we would like to have our flags flown in our territory. So that's another problem that we have that we need to address, because now we've had communications, we've sat down with them, we've had this discussion with them, and now that's what they're hoping that we could do. So that's the whole purpose of why we brought this forward, is because we've been hearing from a lot of the First Nations about flags in our immediate discussions with them. So just wanted to provide that clarification.
If I may, as a supplement, Madam Chair, is that if that's what we decide going forward, it doesn't have to be today, is that those flags, if we're talking about a flag, those flags could be flown in or could be inside.
Right there. I mean, that's another
Similar.
option right there.
Exactly.
When
So
they
I
ask-
think we should, and again, when I didn't like the plaque that it said or on the municipality. I thought that we should make sure that it's all inclusive. And that's exactly what we do in Barrier with that. We have the Barrier, we have the BC flag, the Barrier flag, Sim flag in our chambers. So it's important for us to be able to think that maybe that's a compromise that we could do very quickly as we go forward with this. And then if we want to recognize outside, we can do that as well. And if this is the building, that is sort of like the flagship, and we decide as a group, as a board, that yes, we want to put another flagpole up, and yes, we think it's appropriate to have the Kamloops flag there, then that's what we do.
Just a quick follow-up. So this is the one option we didn't talk about, was we talked about plaques, we talked about flags, but the stands that are over here in the corner, that could be a possibility for libraries too. So it's not the one mounted outside. It's more cost effective than actually poles in front of the building, but that's just another option to consider.
I just need some clarity from Advisor Kelly. Was it your intention to take this discussion we're having today back and then come forward with more information on it? I mean, do you need us to agree to these amendments to continue your discussions and your budgeting and everything else?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so the intent of this was not, again, to reiterate, it was not to request budget from the board to install additional flag poles. It was not to take on additional costs or actually get into the discussion around the installation of First Nations flags at our buildings. The intent was to amend the policy to allow staff to go back and look at what the options could be. And potentially we come back to the board with budgetary requests and further approvals if, you know, the option is to install an additional flagpole at the front of this building. So that was in order for me to move forward in this work. I mean, the policy prior to being amended does not allow for anything but the Canadian flag, the BC flag, the host municipality flag, and the TNRD flag at TNRD buildings. So I can have all the discussions I want with First Nations, and we have, as CAO Hildebrand alluded to, with SIMC and with the Kamloops, and they have given us approval to use their flags and said, yes, we want our flags flown at your buildings. But I can't now do anything with that unless our policy is amended. So that's, yes, I would like something for further direction.
Director Laird.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We don't need a policy change yet for you to do that work. We can give direction for you to go and gather the information on exactly what we've been talking about. Bring it back to this committee with all the information, because right now the policy change is not where we need to be make be able to do your job. You already have the ability to go and meet and talk to them, but you don't need a policy change for that. You have the ability to do that now without policy. Policy is how we govern, and I'm not prepared to put this into our policy yet till I get a lot more information on the direction and what we're doing. It's just not working for me. Thank you.
Director Roden and then Director Stamer.
Thank you. I am by no means a parliamentarian, but I suspect that what Mr. Kelly might be saying is that it would be cleaner and easier for him to proceed if the policy was changed. And for me, it's a simple change to the policy presented in front of us. Item 3, types of flags, only the following types of flags will be flown. If we changed or simply removed the "or" in front of flag of hosting municipality, this is simply saying then these are the 5 types of flags that we can display. It is not saying we will, it is not saying how, it is not saying when or where. Well, it is saying where. But that is all it needs, is to remove "or" flag of hosting municipality. Now we are left with a policy that says there are 5 types of flags which may be flown outside TNRD buildings. That I think would sufficiently clean up the policy to allow Mr. Kelly to have the freedom then to take further direction from the committee to then proceed with other investigations about what that might look like. Am I correct?
Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, that's exactly what I was suggesting, and that's the reason why I made the motion in the first place about the "or." The only difference is that we have to change flag of the hosting First Nation to host of First Nations. Correct? Because it could be multiple nations. So again, that's just a slight change, but it does change the intent.
Anybody else? We have Director Laird's motion on the floor. Any more discussion on it? Can one of you read back his motion, please?
The motion was for Corbin, well, Mr. Kelly, to return back to the committee with a proposed plan and budget with regards to the flag policy.
Everybody
and the
clear?
First Nation.
Director Stamer.
I have a question to Director Laird, in as much as that, Director Laird, do you believe that what they put in here as a change to the flag policy is appropriate and it's something that we should be acting upon regardless of whether we need staff to go back to further gain more information in regards to how we're going to actually do this, if we're going to do this, what it's going to cost? If we make a motion to the effect that now we're going to allow First Nation flags to fly in our building, is that something that you would be amenable towards?
I still don't feel that a policy change is needed to bring information back. There's so little information now. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm wrong, but can't this information be brought back to us without a policy change?
Sure, could. I mean, that's the motion that you're suggesting. It could come back that way. I think that the comment that Director Roden made would be maybe a real simple thing that wouldn't change anything else, that would still allow us to come back and do what you're suggesting as well. Like, I think they both could mean the same thing.
And if I may, the reason I'm asking the question is because does our existing policy make it so that we cannot fly the Kamloops flag in this building? Or does it stop us from being able to fly or mount the SIMP flag in barrier? Does our existing policy not allow us to do that?
It does not. The existing policy clearly lays out 4 types of flags that will be flown, and it does not allow for First Nations flags to be flown in our buildings.
So that's my point, is that I agree with Director Laird that if we were going to be putting flagpoles out and all those kinds of things, that we have to be done appropriately, but I can't see any reason why we as a committee could recommend to the board that if the board chooses that we put a Tecumseh flag right over there, I don't see any reason why we couldn't do that personally. And if it means that we have to make a policy change to allow that to happen, I would support that.
Can I ask a question before I go to you? If you'd have further discussions with the bands, would it be easier to show our commitment if we have made this change in our policy? Is this like a first step to show that we care?
It is, and thank you for that question, Madam Chair. And the only other thing that I will add is that this is bringing the board more in line with the 2023-2026 strategic plan. You clearly, as a board, outlined the need for relationships and reconciliation. This is a step towards those relationships and reconciliation. We have had, like I've iterated before, and so is CAO Hildebrand, we have had these discussions with Tecumseh and SIMC already. And there's not much more that we can do until a policy is changed to show them that our board is serious about moving forward and building those relationships.
CAO Hildebrand, did you have something? Okay, you're good. Anybody else?
Oh, if I just
Thank
for
you.
clarification, is that the Tecumseh flag right there? So is it actually in contravention of our policy by having it here right now?
My understanding through the chair is it's the flagpole policy. It's the public facing ones that we have out in front of the building is the policy that, how I read it. Yeah, this was us trying to find a way when they came to have a meeting to get their flag up after they said, "Where is my flag?"
Anybody else, or can I call the question? Nobody else calling the question? All those in favor of the motion? Okay. Director Laird's motion, yes. Just to get more information and not proceed with the amendment to the bylaw. Okay, so some people don't put their hands up very far. Can you put them up high enough that I can see you? Okay, we have 1. And all those opposed? Okay, motion is defeated. Marnie,
Can we just have a show of hands so we can record those opposed, please?
wouldn't it be easier to just do who was in favor?
Okay, we got it.
We got it.
Because Director Roden,
Thank you. I would like to make a recommendation that the policy committee approve the flag protocol as presented with 2 amendments. Flag of the hosting First Nations, plural, and that we remove the "or" from in front of flag of hosting municipality.
Second.
Before that, we need to amend, we need to take Will out in favor of me. We did not want to leave it where Will.
Correct. So
That we had to do it, so that.
only the following types of flags may be flown by the TNRD. So that's 3 amendments to the flag protocol as presented.
Scott, we should always have a copy editor on our board.
I'm sorry, say that again.
We should always have a copy editor on our board.
I know.
Okay, any discussion on this motion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to the next issue, which is the board training. Oh, Barbara, yeah, sorry. It's okay,
Yes,
yell
I
out.
did. So if we want staff to proceed with, for example, contacting all the First Nations within the TNRD and explaining our updated flag protocol policy, does staff need direction from us in the form of a recommendation, or would that go then to the board?
No, no. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just was listening to concerns about do we need to make sure that this moves forward? Okay, thank you.
Director Morris, did I see your hand up? No. Okay, Director Laird, then am I back to you too? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. The policy change, I don't think we need to give direction anymore because the policy has to be taken to the board for approval. And when the board approves the change to our policy, then staff has direction to move forward. I don't think we need to give direction to for them to move forward with their flag policy.
Anyone else? Okay, we're moving on to the next item, which is the board training.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The second point here is simply a verbal update. There's no motion to be voted on. But the topic to bring forward to the committee, at least for any additional comments that the committee might have to make, is board training that will be coming forward for board approval this afternoon. The purpose of this training is to bring the board further in line with their 2023-2026 strategic plan. And it is recommended that the board, the TNRD facilitate cultural humility training for all directors of the board, including those on the hospital board. This will be done through organization called SANYAS. They frequently train a number of health districts within our province. It is an 8-week long, 1 hour a week course that is self-directed. But again, the purpose of this is to just bring the board further in line with the strategic plan that was approved for this term. So.
CIO Hildebrand.
Sorry, if I could also just add through you, Chair Bass, is that the management team has already gone through training very similar to this, and it was very successful and well received.
Any other questions or discussion? Okay, Director Middleton.
This would be then similar to the training that the City of Kamloops has used for employees as well as our council and
It might be a
members
different
that have
twist,
gone
but
through.
yes,
We
exactly.
did those two.
Yeah, my understanding is
exercises
it
that-
is different.
it
It has
different?
more depth to it than what we had.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're moving on to Manager Ellison and the whistleblower policy.
Thank you. So I think I distributed everybody a copy of the current, or maybe we'll start referring to it as previous policy. It's Board Policy 7.16. It's titled the Disclosure Policy. An update or review of this policy was recommended as part of our BDO forensic audit recommendations. And I have 3 suggested revisions to the policy, but largely pending one more significant question around the direction we want to proceed with this policy. So what I'll maybe do is give you a quick walkthrough of what I see as 3 potential revisions, and then lead you into the bigger question for your discussion and feedback, which is why I'm here today. So in terms of 3 recommendations, I think the first recommendation that I would formally make to change this policy is to retitle it whistleblower policy. It's currently titled disclosure policy, but sometimes people know what whistleblower means and do not know what disclosure means. Find even as a staff group, we ask ourselves this question, where's the whistleblower policy? It's because it's hiding called the disclosure policy. So updating the title would be one significant update. The second update that I would propose is in the purpose paragraph. So that's on page 1 of the printed copy in front of you. The purpose is quite lengthy in our current policy, and it is the second half that I would actually recommend removing. So our purpose, if you read it, the initial part says policy sets out guidelines for reporting investigation of serious breach of applicable laws and regulations where there are no procedures in place for doing so, and provides protection from retaliation to those who disclose serious misconduct in good faith. Period. And purpose is done. We currently have another sentence in there that talks about recognizing individuals' rights to reports and encouraging them to do so internally through internal procedures, which is a little bit, in my mind, when I read it, the intent kind of strays a bit. Our whistleblower policy should be to encourage people to come forward. Not to say we encourage you to come forward and strongly recommend you use the internal procedures as outlined here, just come forward. So our well is kind of like a but section that we probably should simply eliminate. The third revision that I would recommend for this policy is largely housekeeping. We have out-of-date position titles. So we used to call our senior management team department directors. They're called general managers largely now, or the CFO or the chief librarian. So we would update the language. The same with my position title is no longer current. So those are minor housekeeping changes. The other change I would make is to the chart on page 2 that talks about reporting alleged misconduct. I think we can simplify it. Quite frankly, if I read through the chart as it stands now, I am a staff member. If I had a concern about a board of director member, I don't think this covers how I would report it. It's phrased really awkwardly. So I think we can simplify that immensely, which would make a huge difference in impact. So those would be, I think, the revisions to this policy to bring it up to date, to make it easier to understand, make it more easier to digest for folks to access and utilize. The more significant question that I have for discussion today with the board is there was some earlier, I think, feedback would be even too strong of a word, so I'm going to use mention that we may want to hire the use of an external firm to receive whistleblower complaints. So this is done sometimes in larger organizations. You look at Fraser Health or the City of Vancouver, the City of Edmonton, they contract out companies to receive whistleblower complaints. So there are two forms in which that can happen. One would be to hire a law firm, and they would receive complaints of a whistleblowing in nature. So people could contact this law firm to file a whistleblower complaint. The law firm would take that complaint and then kind of transfer it over to the correct person at the TNRD to then follow that up. The second option is there are, I would use the term hotlines or services, phone services that would do this service. And one example of a company is called Centrio. They basically, it's a telephone answering service. So it's external, they take the call, they gather the information, and then they send it to us for review. Costs for those services are actually slightly similar. A law firm would charge you somewhere around $5,000 annually to do this. Then they would charge you, of course, their legal fees for any discussions you had with them about such concerns that came forward, which run around $500 a year. You know, in my duration here at the TNRD since September 2021, we have not had a whistleblowing complaint. So that 500 an hour, I mean, it depends. It's hard to predict or budget what that might look like. So then you could estimate $5,000 a year just for hiring of the service. The same with the reporting hotlines. I looked them up. If you charge an initial setup fee between $500 and $1,000, and then an annual fee between $4,000 and $5,000. So there's a small cost associated with having that external service receive complaints. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it there and seek your feedback and questions about the policy. Thank you.
Discussion? No? No one? Okay, cool. Thank you.
I guess the question remains, what is the board's preference? To have an external answering service or leave it internal?
I've got a question on that then, since, which would be, you're talking about whistleblowers, not just complaints?
Correct.
Okay, so we
whistleblowing
don't have to
only.
worry about vexatious or frivolous.
Well, we always have to worry about that.
I know.
So, yeah.
I know, like
Anybody-
who's going to be the arbitrator of that? Because sometimes you can have somebody who just hates everybody.
Yes. So even if you had an external service answering the calls or receiving the complaints, they're not doing any investigation into the validity of those complaints. So they would simply take the transcript of the complaint or the call and provide it then to the appropriate person internally, which depending on what the complaint is about may vary. If it's about myself, it would go to potentially the CAO and the board chair. If it's about a board chair member, it maybe goes to the CAO. So that then would need to be investigated. And then the policy currently speaks, and I think it has a good process around determining should that investigation happen by an internal or external investigator. That would remain the same, whether or not we have a third party answering the phone, so to speak.
Okay, that clarifies it, because then we could decide, the CAO could decide if it's frivolous.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other discussion? She needs an answer on what we want. Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the report. Well, it seems like I think we've already got the safeguards in place to be able to do it the way we're doing it right now. I don't see any reason why we would have to go so that we have to call 911 every single time there's anything to be done. I think the mechanisms are in place currently, so I wouldn't want to change what we have. But I think it's something that we could possibly be looking forward in the future as we grow, that maybe, and if we do have a situation, you know, that comes up, we may find that, you know, maybe that's that one step that we should have taken. But to me, it seems like the organization has done a pretty good job putting together the whistleblower policy in the first place. And by approving your changes, I think that's just continually improving the whole process.
Anyone else? No? I would agree with Director Stamer, because we don't get a lot of whistleblower complaints, do we? So we could be spending $5,000 a year for nothing.
Correct.
And if the place is being run well, we shouldn't be getting whistleblower complaints. Okay, are you all right with that, Manager Ellison? Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Member reports. Anyone have anything they want to report? Moving on then. Adjournment. Moving on. Thank you. See y'all this afternoon, huh?